Welcome back to the Self-Employment podcast. We are again joined by our co-hosts Jackson and Jake, and I am Matthew. Today we're going to be hearing from one of our co-hosts, Jackson, about his clothing company, specifically on what he's doing to differentiate himself in the very competitive and saturated space in the clothing industry. So Jackson, give us a 30-second synopsis of where the idea came from and ultimately when you decided to put boots on the ground, so to speak.
Right, that's a great question, Matt. Really briefly then, the idea came from a need I've seen in my own life. I'm very outdoorsy, and due to that, it puts a lot of wear and tear on my clothing. And so that being said, and Matt, you actually introduced me to this. There are some fibers out there, some newer materials that are very, very durable, and that immediately gave me this idea of, okay, well, I can make clothing that's durable. And I found out, only 0.1% of the world clothing markets actually uses this. So then I saw this, like you said, the clothing market's saturated, and then no one's touched this space. So when I saw the opportunity combined with it filling the need that I had, it was just an immediately I wanted to get on that.
That's awesome. I think we had talked briefly in a previous episode about how the value proposition, so to speak, is something that you would have bought into if someone else had done it. And so, by nature of you having this issue, we talked about how you wear out your socks a lot and you mess up your pants with climbing and hiking and bushwhacking and all this stuff. We talked about how you saw the need and now you're acting on it. So give us your first couple of, everyone can have an idea, but give us your first two real concrete hardcore steps that you took. Was that finding some money? Was that designing a logo? Something like that?
Right, that's a really good question because I have a lot of ideas, and so I will, I'll constantly be thinking through all these ideas, but, none of them have actually hit the ground. And so that being said, with this idea, seeing so much potential, I really wanted to see something concrete out of it. So I'd say the two biggest first steps I took was really researching. I had to look into the space, and I had to look in how I could create this, right? This is newer technology. I had to figure out a way to do that, and I put together this little plan of how to do it. And then with that in mind, I had a buddy, immediately as I had this idea, I thought he would be a great partner for me. And so I reached out to him and showed him my plan, and he wanted to invest for some equity. And now he and I together are starting this. So step one was research and put a plan together. And then step two was start moving forward with that plan, whether, it's getting funding or whatever it was. For me, that's what it was, finding a partner and working with him.
That's awesome. So it sounds like there's a common trend between yourself or your and Matt's story with being entrepreneurial by nature, wanting to solve all these issues or finding additional ways to, bring value to whatever marketplace you decided to be in. So talk briefly real quick, what is the value in your life of bringing in that focus? Because everyone knows that, you can't have 100 different ideas and execute on all of them, right? And so tell us a little bit more about what were the things that really helped you focus? Because I know you have a couple of other ideas going on right now. Walk us through how the progression of this, business plan or these partners or some sort of, equity investment or designing or whatever it is, how is that focusing or how is that harnessing your focus? Because obviously that you're not going to succeed unless you focus on this, right?
Right, that's exactly right. I've had hundreds of ideas and done tons of little projects on my own, and a lot of them, haven't been successful. And so I think to answer that question, this is the first idea I've really taken so seriously to be accountable for with someone else's money. So not, this isn't just me, I'll go build an app and submit it. I've done that several times. I have a lot of fun doing that. But this was, okay, I really think this is a good idea. And so I thought it was such a good idea that I went and got an investment. My buddy literally invested in the idea and became a partner with me. So this is the first idea where I've had real accountability if I don't perform. I need to focus in, I need to perform because I'm playing with someone else's resources and someone else is a partner on this. So I'd say that's the biggest differentiating factor from this idea and, the hundreds of others that I've had.
Yeah, I like all the stuff you've been saying so far, and just kind of going back to the just since the industry is so densely populated with all these other manufacturers out there, and you mentioned that the one part of the industry that only has 1% with the new like eco-friendly kind of material you'll be using, why do you think there's only 1% share in that market? Like, do you think it's because it's, not necessary to have? Like, what is the motive, do you think,
That's a great question because, if only 0.1% of a saturated industry uses it, it's probably because it's not very good. And so that was part of when I researched it. I was like, oh, no one uses it, so it's an open market. But I was like, why is it an open market? And so what I found is as I did research, these are newer fibers for the clothing, and it's developing technology. It's hard to source. It's hard to get this material, right? So if you're a big clothing, name brand, you move slowly. It's hard to introduce a whole new line of product, especially when it's hard to source. So like with this company I'm working with to do this, I found out they can do this, but with, a regular cotton shirt, I could just do 30 to 40 on my minimums. With this, we have to do a minimum of 1,000 per unit, per product, just because the material is so hard to source. So I think the biggest reason no one's using it is because it's difficult to get their hands on right now. So that being said, I see a window of, it's not necessarily because it's not a good market, it's because it's difficult for people to get their hands on. But I also see that changing in the future. And so that's what gives me, that's why I want to push into this is I think it's going to become more of a viable option. And I think the reason people aren't doing it is because it's difficult, not because it's not wanted.
You're kind of sounding like one of our favorite people, Elon Musk, with Tesla. Um, it wasn't that, traditional or legacy auto manufacturers weren't capable of developing, great technology in the electric vehicle space, is that they were already satisfied with what they were doing. And Elon Musk, he preaches about the literal, he calls it production hell that they went through to build basically every one of their products. So I think it's interesting that you recognize that this is going to be kind of an uphill battle, not because there's like stiff competition, but because your competition owns the eyes of everyone, all the consumers. And so you just need to convince, it sounds like you just need to convince customers that this is a newer, a better, a more viable, economic, literally cheaper, product. So walk us through or just chat a little bit about how you see, 2 or 3 years from now, let's say you have hundreds of thousands of orders. What is something that you independently are going to do to differentiate yourself? Like best case scenario, what are you going to do, LYEN, to differentiate yourself from, companies like Cotopaxi or Patagonia when they inevitably enter the space because you made the space, right? You develop it, and obviously all these companies are going to go for it. So what are you going to do to differentiate yourself?
Right. That's a great question. And to be honest, I don't know if I have a great answer for that. That is a tough question. And, if you think about it, if I really do develop this new clothing and people love it, then of course these bigger brands are going to start to do that. And so that's an important question. I would just say off the top of my head, what I'm hoping for is to be the first in this space, the first brand in this. And this is all that I do. So these brands are very broad. They do many things. My company is, hey, we do outdoor clothing and we do it really well because our material outperforms every other option on the market, right? And if I can get there first and if I can become the brand for that, right? Then when they're stepping in, it's like, oh, look, Patagonia does what LYEN's doing, right? And it's just inherently we're the ones who did that.
So you'd basically go through the exact same steps that Tesla is now. Like it's impossible to talk about electric vehicles and the revolution without mentioning Tesla. It's not because they necessarily have the best products, but it's because they were the first, they were the most entrenched, right? It's kind of like the origin story of, Ford Motor Company. Ford Motor Company doesn't necessarily produce cars that are better than everyone else, but they were the first to figure out how to build it fast, and that was like what was so intrinsic about their company as a whole is like they're these American manufacturers. People are going to quote unquote pledge allegiance to them because they were the first. It's not necessarily because they did it the best. It's just they were the first, and there's something cool about that. Same thing applies to Apple, right? They were the first to really introduce an awesome mass market smartphone. And I have no idea what the metrics are, but there's probably tens of millions of people that are buying the next iPhone every year or two purely because they were the first and they have this like brand loyalty. So sounds like you're going to try to develop some brand loyalty because you're new to the space.
Yeah, we've been talking about a lot of good stuff so far. I would like to kind of move on a little bit and move on to like how you designed your logo and what it means. Because it's called LYEN, right? Why is it called LYEN? What is the logo? What were the steps you kind of had to go through? Did you have to go through all your partners to make sure that, they all agreed with the logo, or is this all like just solely you, or how to just run us through a couple of the things just real quick.
Yeah, that's a great question. This podcast being about starting, how it started was the brand name just kind of came to me one day. I don't really know, like, have a good answer for it. I was sitting there and I was like, what would I call this? And I was thinking, I want warranties. And I was like, oh, so it's like the last outfit you'll need, or last you'll ever need. And then I was like, hold up. So then I thought acronym, so LYEN, last you'll ever need. And I didn't even pronounce it. Actually, I was telling my brother about it because I was super excited. And he's kind of artistic. And he's like, dude, this is sick. And I was like, well, like, I don't know. I like the acronym, and he goes, LYEN. And then he like sketched out a lion coming out of the LYEN, like a lion head, like the animal. And so immediately I was like, oh, that's a pretty sick logo, actually. So we have the lion head. Now you know how to pronounce it. But then the text sums up the idea of the brand, which is last you'll ever need, like high quality, durable clothing. So it just kind of flowed together that way. So when I pitched my partners on it, I had a concept art for the logo and the name, and they loved it. And so when I partnered with this company, they did professional logo design. So we just kind of we had to run through a few mock-ups. We didn't love what they had at first. And I was working with my partners on this process every time they gave me a new logo. And eventually we settled on one that all of us agreed on and liked.
That's sweet. So tell us about how, all these companies have really famous logos, right? Like Nike has the swoosh, Apple has the apple, Tesla's got that cool T, whatever. What are you going to do to, build not necessarily this brand loyalty, but this brand image? How are you going to market it? Is there some sort of thing? I know we've talked a little bit about potential trips coming up that we can, develop a lot of cool production material. Walk us through what is the value of producing quality content? Because Matt had talked about how that's one of his main focuses now is just producing content. And that same thing is to build brand loyalty, to introduce new products. So walk us through kind of what your plan is from at the grassroots level, building that plan, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. One thing I would say is I think a lot of this will be sort of experimental. I have my own ideas that I think are subject to change based on results, right? So I may think something will work and it may not. So that being with, that caveat there, how I imagine this going is I think I want this to become the outdoor clothing brand. So you're going hiking, oh, you want LYEN clothes. Oh, you're going climbing now, or you're getting into climbing, LYEN clothing, right? It's just the best clothing for that. And so that's what I want it to become. So that being said, I think connections are going to be massive. Jake, a photographer who does a lot of outdoor photography, so I would want to partner with him and have him be posting, wearing the clothing, showing the clothing in cool places. Like you said, you're going on some trips, get the clothing there, right? See pictures of it in the outdoors. Have a really heavy online presence. I want to make a lot of, videos and be very, very present online in the outdoor environment, showing the clothing. And I think that'll help kind of create that image. You see an ad where you're rock climbing in the clothing, and then you're thinking about rock climbing. You're like, oh, there's a brand who makes clothes, for that. So that's kind of my vision there.
Mm-hmm. And I think just speaking a little more intrinsically there, we live in an amazing state, right, where there's tons of awesome outdoor opportunities. All three of us love hiking, mountain biking, climbing. We love being outdoors. So if you can speak a little bit more to what do you hope happens with people buying your clothing? Do you think people are going to buy your clothing because they see a video of someone rock climbing or hiking somewhere cool in the world? Is this supposed to motivate them? Is that the kind of chink in the consumer's armor? You're trying to help them feel cool, and then subsequently providing better economic or environmental impact. Does that make sense? Is that your kind of go-to, is just help people recognize that they can be cool with awesome products outdoors? Because obviously there are companies that have cool products for outdoors. So I guess what sets you aside from them? Is it in the marketing? Do you have a lot of you're talking about the eco impact, the warranty impact, last you ever need, right? Are you going to emphasize the durability? Because a lot of people buying these expensive Eddie Bauer jackets and Patagonia jackets, they get those ripped. They don't care. They're going to go buy another one for $200 or $300, right? So speak a little bit more on that. Is there just more consumers that are interested in spending a little bit higher dollar amount for a better product?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this is one I think I'm going to have to learn through trial and error. That's very much my learning process is trial and error. I try things and I see what sticks, and I try a lot of things and see kind of what lands. And so that being said, I think that it will be important to highlight the differences in our clothing. So, I think part of it is that image of like, hey, buy this clothing, like be cool, get outside, and you'll have the clothing for it. And part of it too will be filling a need. Like you said, like people, they buy these nice jackets and they rip them, and it's then you have to buy a new one. So maybe someone who is already an outdoorsy kind of person, they see this and they're like, oh, and we've emphasized the warranty or the durability. Or someone's really the outdoorsy and they're very environmentally conscious, and so they see it, with the eco-friendly aspect. And so I think it'll kind of depend. I think part of it will be hitting needs people already have, and then part of it will be showing people this opportunity of, hey, this clothing is perfect for you if you're wanting to be in the outdoors and start going out there and trying these new things, and I want to create a company that really encourages getting out of the outdoors, because I think it's very powerful. For me, I go outside a lot just because it clears my head and helps me stay centered a little bit. I like to get out, and I think that's good for people.
That's great. Just kind of jumping into like another side of things real quick. So let's kind of just start talking about what are the next steps for, your company, right? What is to come in the future? What is next week? What is next month? What are you and your partners talking about currently? Is there anything that you would like to say that, could help you, like potentially just kind of talk about and speak it out? Would that actually help? Like just kind of give us a little rundown on like what's to come.
Yeah, for sure. So we've talked about the idea and the vision. Here's some very, the practical next steps, the nitty gritty of what this looks like is I've got some digital mock-ups of what I want the clothes to look like that my partners and I are all very happy with. And I've shown to a couple people. I've done some test advertising and gotten a decent enough response on it. So we're ready to move forward to samples. We've spent quite a lot of time reviewing and revising. In fact, my contact at this company has been kind of irritated with me. I sent him a text like, hey, just a few more revisions. And he like laughed at me. He was like, more revisions? And so we've reviewed a lot and revised a lot, but we're pretty happy with our design. So what we're going to do now is we're working with this material, and we have to be, this is a very tricky part because our material has to be good. I have one of my partners is in charge right now of like the warranties, and he's been researching that. So we're not going to, lose too much money, but still have very powerful, incentivizing warranties. And so right now, I've ordered some shirts that are, because 0.1% of the market still does produce clothing like this. So I've ordered some clothing of this material to get a feel for it. I already have some of it. I ordered a couple more. You can blend it with other materials to make it a little more comfortable or a little more flexible. And so I need to kind of pick our material blend, and those should be getting here next week. And then the week after that, what they're called tech packs. It's the digital file that this firm will send to a manufacturer so they can actually make the clothing. Those will be ready next week as well. And so once we're happy with the tech packs and we've picked our material blend, then what we do is we place an order for samples, which will come 15 to 20 business days after that. And then from there, if we're happy with then we revise if we're not happy with the samples. If we're pleased with the samples, we're going to then the next step is funding, the bulk order of all of the clothing and to start actually selling it. So those, a lot of things can happen in between that time, but as a general overview, that's kind of what the next steps look like.
Awesome. I think that gives, our listeners and Matt and I a good understanding of kind of what you're working on when you're on your computer, right behind us. We understand who you're communicating with, what's going to happen. So I know you've already talked about it a little bit. You've given a brief timeline. If I'm a listener and I'm a big, hiking advocate, or I'm really, environmentally conscious, like you said, how long before I can get LYEN clothing in my hands? How long before, someone asks me at Bryce Canyon National Park, like, hey, what kind of clothing is that? Like, that looks pretty interesting, how long would you estimate?
That's a good question. That's something I don't really know. My best guess, if everything goes well, I'll place the orders for the samples next week. And then if everything goes well from there, within 2 weeks after that, we'll have samples. And then once we have the samples and, if everything goes well there and we're just happy with that first batch of samples, we're ready to go. Our plan from there is to crowdfund because we're going to need quite a bit of capital up front to actually buy since our minimums are so high. And so what I want to start doing is advertising a little bit, getting attention, and then we crowdfund, and then we pay for the manufacturing, and then we have to get all the product manufactured. So, let's say it was a week, and then 2 weeks, and then probably 1 to 2 months, maybe even 3 crowdfunding. And then the manufacturing, it's difficult to say. There's been some supply chain issues, so it could be anywhere from, 2 months to 6 or 8 months. That's something I don't really know, but I would, I'm hoping to sell as fast as possible. It could be sometime next year.
That's great. Just kind of, closing up here, I just want to ask one more question. Because we've talked about the future a lot, let's just kind of reflect on the past a little bit. Like I know you haven't, and your partners haven't been in this industry very long at all. It's only been, a couple months, if that, a couple weeks. Like, what would you have changed so far into your journey? Like, what is prominent that stands out to you? Because I know, in my stuff, there's always stuff that just doesn't work, and you don't realize that until after the fact, right? And I wish I didn't do it this way, but I learned my lesson, right? So, do you have any of those so far?
That is a good question. Let me think about that for a second. You know what? Looking back, it was more just an idea I was excited about and wanted to get moving on, and I was pretty liberal with equity, which is fine. I have really great partners who are contributing, but coming to where I am now, and it's hard to place value on an idea when we still haven't sold anything, but I see a lot of potential for this. And so part of me wishes I placed a little more value on it, put a little more effort in at the beginning and held on to a little bit more of it, and not to, I love my partners and they've been incredibly helpful in this process. So that being said, this is new to me. I can't say that, I'm just happy with the progress we've made. That's one thing is I see so much more potential than I did a couple months ago. And so I treated the idea a little more trivially than I have recently. And that's something, if I could go back, I'd be like, hey, just so you know, this has this kind of potential and treat it, with that kind of respect.
That's great. Awesome. Thank you, Jackson, for, sharing all of your stuff about business with us today. And, for the listeners that have been listening, just kind of a brief summary. Basically, we've just kind of talked about, why is the industry so small and why does Jackson actually think he's going to be, a big, major part of that industry? Why did he choose his logos the way he did with his partners? All the warranties he's kind of gone over, estimated timelines and all that stuff, going into the future and the past a little bit. And so it's, it's just a really new thing to him. And there's not always a ton to talk about. There's a lot of questions that are hard to answer sometimes. And I totally understand that. But with, some time and a couple months behind you, you'll be able to answer those pretty well, right? So we kind of just, that is it. So thank you for listening on this podcast today. This is our 4th podcast. So we're going to keep it up as long as you do. So we'll see you guys next time.